A widow's grief was so powerful, it turned her loyal horse into a monster. As they prepared to put it down, a legendary cowboy arrived with his giant black stallion. But he didn't come to break the horse. He came to break the silence. Oak Creek Valley was once a place of peace. Now it was home to a storm, and the eye of that storm was contained within the worn circular corral of the Vance Ranch. Inside was Inferno. Just 6 months ago, that name evoked the image of a magnificent, gentle, and loyal chestnut stallion, a mirror of his cheerful owner, John Vance. Now, with John gone, the name Inferno had taken on its literal meaning, a living hell. The horse slammed against the wooden walls, his eyes rolling white with fear and rage, foam frothing at his mouth, a heartbreaking picture of chaos. Standing outside the fence, a group of weathered men argued. Their words were harsh, punctuated by the frantic whinnies from within. "He's a monster, Alara," said a man named Burton, the foreman of a neighboring ranch. "He went after my new ranch hand. Before he kills someone, we have to end this." In their midst, Alara Vance stood like a statue carved from stone. In her late 40s, her face still held the lines of sharp beauty, but they were hidden beneath a mask of stoicism, a fortress built of unspoken pain. She did not cry. She did not plead. She just stood, her hands clenched into tight fists at her sides, her eyes fixed on her late husband's enraged horse, utterly devoid of emotion. Her silence was more terrifying than the horse's screams. Burton, his patience gone, motioned to one of his men. The man reluctantly raised a rifle. The air grew thick and heavy. They weren't just preparing to kill an animal. They were preparing to erase the last living remnant of a life cut short. It was at that moment that two figures appeared on the dusty road. A man and a horse, but not just any horse. Standing immense and proud beside the cowboy was Redemption, the giant black stallion of legend. His sheer size made the other ranch horses look like ponies, and his profound calm was a stark, living contrast to the chaos in the corral. The cowboy, Cole Younger, dismounted. His face was thoughtful, his eyes holding the quiet wisdom of a man who had faced his own demons. He nodded at the men, but his gaze didn't linger on them, nor on the frantic horse. It settled on Alara. He saw the dry eyes, the tightly pressed lips, the knuckles white from clenching. He didn't see a woman with a horse problem. He saw a soul being held prisoner by its own pain. Cole walked to the fence, Redemption following like a loyal shadow. He stood there for a long moment, just watching, listening to the symphony of rage and silence. Finally, he turned to Alara, his voice low and without judgment. "I got your letter." Alara only nodded, her fortress unshaken. Burton snorted. "You're too late, Younger. There's nothing to tame here. This beast needs to be put down." Cole didn't respond to Burton. His eyes remained on Alara. He spoke a sentence that was not an offer, but a simple, raw truth. A sentence that stunned the men to silence and put a small, hairline crack in the widow's stoic mask. "That's not the horse's rage, ma'am. That's yours." A dead silence fell over the group. Burton and the others looked at him as if he were insane. But Alara, for the first time, reacted. A flicker of fury sparked in her empty eyes. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice raw from disuse. "Give me 3 days." "To do what?" "Whisper nonsense to him like they say in the stories." "Number. To give you a safe place to scream. The horse is just an excuse." Alara stared at Cole. A silent battle of wills waged between two once-broken souls. She saw no pity in his eyes, only a deep, unnerving understanding. Whether from sheer exhaustion, or because his words had struck a truth she didn't dare admit, she made her decision. She turned to Burton. 3 days, she said, her voice like ice. then you can do what you have to do." She turned and walked back to the house without another word. Cole stood, watching her ramrod straight back, then turned to the horse still raging in the corral. The real fight, he knew, wasn't in there. It was in that silent house. The first day began not with a confrontation, but with a strange, quiet ritual. The other ranch hands, on Alara's cold instruction, stayed away, leaving the remote corral in a bubble of tense silence. They watched from a distance, expecting to see the legendary horse whisperer at work. They expected whips, ropes, or some mystical display of dominance. What they saw instead was a man doing chores. Cole did not enter Inferno's corral. Instead, he unsaddled Redemption in the adjacent pen, the one that shared a long fence line with Inferno's. He moved with a slow, deliberate economy of motion. He brushed Redemption's massive dark coat, the rhythmic sound of the bristles a stark contrast to the frantic scuffing of hooves from the other side of the fence. Redemption stood like a black granite mountain, occasionally letting out a low, rumbling sigh, a sound of pure contentment. He was an anchor of calm in a sea of turmoil. Inferno reacted to their presence with predictable fury. He would charge the shared fence, snorting and kicking up dust, a clear, violent display of territorial rage. But neither Cole nor Redemption flinched. They simply continued their work, their silence, a quiet refusal to participate in the chaos. Cole was not ignoring the horse. He was denying its rage the validation of a reaction. After an hour, Cole walked over to the main house. Alara was on the porch, her arms crossed, her face an unreadable mask. "I could use a hand mending that back fence by the corral. I pay ranch hands for that. They're afraid of your horse. I'm not. But the fence won't fix itself." It was a simple statement of fact, not a request. Reluctantly, as if being forced against her will, she retrieved a worn pair of leather gloves and followed him. For the next several hours, they worked in near silence, replacing a rotten post, tightening loose wire. All the while, Inferno watched them. His furious charges became less frequent, replaced by a restless pacing as he observed the two humans and the giant, calm stallion, just a few yards away. It was then that Cole began to speak. He didn't look at Alara. He kept his eyes on his work, his voice a low, steady murmur that seemed directed at the fence post he was setting. He didn't ask her about John. He didn't ask her about her pain. He spoke of his own. "The first few months, after my brother, I didn't talk to anyone, except the bottle, and the silence. The silence was the worst. It gets so loud inside your own head, you think you're gonna go crazy. You start looking for things to blame, a loose cinch, a patch of soft dirt, yourself, anything to give the pain a name." Alara stopped hammering. She stood frozen, her back to him, her knuckles white around the handle of the hammer. She did not respond, but Cole knew she was listening. He was not asking her to look at her own reflection. He was simply showing her his, letting her know she was not the first person to stand on this desolate shore of grief. He continued, his voice weaving a story not of a champion, but of a broken man. He told her about the day at the auction, about seeing a horse so full of the same wild, senseless rage that was eating him alive. "I looked at that horse, the one they called Regret, and I didn't see a monster. I saw a mirror. It was just an animal, lashing out because it was trapped by a pain it didn't have words for. I understood that. Sometimes, the only way to quiet the storm inside is to stand beside another storm and just be still." Inferno had stopped pacing. He now stood by the fence, his head lowered, his ears pricked, listening. Whether to the man's voice or to the profound stillness of the giant black horse beside him, no one could say. But for the first time in months, the wild panic in his eyes had receded, replaced by a flicker of curiosity. Alara still hadn't turned around, but her shoulders, which had been ramrod straight with tension, had slumped ever so slightly. A single crack had appeared in the fortress wall. Cole did not press the advantage. He hammered the last nail into the post and gathered his tools. That's enough for one day. He walked away, leaving her alone with his words, and with the two horses who represented the two sides of her own soul, the raging inferno of her unspoken pain, and the quiet, towering strength she had yet to find within herself. The second day mirrored the first. More quiet work around the corral. More stories from Cole, offered up to the dry air like prayers. Not stories of triumph, but of small, hard-won steps away from the abyss. He spoke of the long weeks he had spent just sitting in the dirt with regret, enduring the horse's rage until it simply ran out of fuel. He spoke of the crushing weight of memory and the slow, arduous process of learning to carry it without being broken by it. Alara's silence remained, but it had changed. It was no longer a defiant, angry silence. It was a heavy, thoughtful one. She worked alongside him, her movements efficient, her face still a mask, but her eyes would occasionally drift to the two stallions. She was watching Redemption's profound stillness, and she was watching Inferno's reluctant curiosity. The wild, frantic energy of the day before was gone. Inferno still kept his distance, but he was no longer a storm. He was a banked fire, watching, waiting. The turning point came not from a grand gesture, but from a moment of simple, human frailty. They were replacing a worn leather strap on the corral gate. Cole held it taut, while Alara tried to drive a new rivet through the thick hide with a hammer and punch. Her hands were strong from years of ranch work, but her mind, weighed down by Cole's stories and her own resurfacing grief, was distracted. The hammer slipped. It wasn't a hard blow, just a clumsy, glancing strike against the side of her hand. But the shock of the unexpected pain, sharp and immediate, was enough. It was the one thing her fortress of control hadn't prepared for. She dropped the hammer with a clatter. She looked down at the angry red mark on her hand, and the carefully constructed walls inside her finally crumbled. A single tear escaped her eye. It traced a clean path through the dust on her cheek. It was not a sob. It was a silent, profound surrender. A single drop of rain, signaling the breaking of a long and terrible drought. Cole saw it, but he did not speak. He did not move to comfort her. He knew this was a moment she had to face alone. But she wasn't alone. From across the corral, another sound broke the stillness. It was a soft, low nicker, a questioning sound, full of a strange, gentle concern. They both looked up. Inferno, who had been watching them from the far side of the pen, had taken a few tentative steps closer. His ears were no longer pinned back in anger, but pricked forward with curiosity. He saw her vulnerability, her first crack in the armor, and he responded not with aggression, but with the first sign of the gentle horse he used to be. He was mirroring her. The storm inside him had calmed the instant the storm inside her had shown its first sign of breaking. Alara quickly wiped the tear away with the back of her glove, embarrassed, as if caught in a moment of weakness. But the connection had been made. The air had changed. That evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, she found Cole by the corral, watching the horses. He was about to turn in for the night. She stood by the fence, not looking at him, but at the two powerful silhouettes. "You said, your brother, did he love horses, too?" It was the first time she had asked him a personal question. The first time she had acknowledged his pain as something real, something connected to her own. It was a small step, but it was a step across a chasm that had seemed impossible to cross just a day before. He loved everything about this life. He was better at it than I ever was. He didn't say more. He didn't have to. The question was not about the answer. It was about the asking. In that quiet moment, under the vast, twilight sky, two lonely souls, guided by the silent wisdom of a horse, had finally found a common ground. The slow, patient work of healing had truly begun. The third day dawned with a fragile truce. The rage was gone from the corral. Inferno no longer paced like a caged tiger. He stood quietly, observing Alara and Cole as they performed their morning chores. There was a visible change in him, a softening. But there was still a line he would not cross. An invisible barrier of memory and pain still separated him from the woman he once trusted implicitly. If Alara moved too close to the corral fence, his ears would twitch, his body would tense, a low rumble of anxiety vibrating in his chest. Cole saw the progress, but he knew they were stuck. The surface-level anger had subsided, but the deep, foundational wound was still festering. Alara was speaking to him now, in quiet, clipped sentences, but she never spoke of the accident. She never spoke of John. The heart of the matter remained a locked room. Cole knew he had to find the key. His eyes scanned the ranch, searching for the missing piece of the puzzle, and then he saw it. It was so ordinary, so much a part of the landscape that he hadn't truly noticed it before. Thrown over the top rail of a fence near the barn, exposed to the sun and rain, was a saddle. It was a beautiful, hand-tooled leather saddle, clearly the work of a master craftsman. But it was covered in a thin layer of dust and neglect, an artifact left exactly where it had fallen on a day that had changed everything. He watched as Alara walked past it, her gaze deliberately averting, her path curving slightly as if to avoid getting too close to its magnetic field of memory. In that small, unconscious movement, Cole understood everything. He waited until she was nearby, feeding the chickens, and walked over to the saddle. He didn't touch it. He just stood before it, his presence forcing her to acknowledge its existence. "That's a fine saddle. John's?" Alara froze. Her hand tightened on the bucket of feed. For a moment, it seemed the icy wall would return. But the past 2 days had worn her down. The fortress had been breached. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was a choked, broken whisper. He was so proud of it. Saved for 2 years to buy it. Said it was his championship saddle. Why is it out here? That was the question that finally broke the dam. The bucket fell from her hand, scattering feed for the chickens. Her face, which had been a mask of stoic control for 6 long months, finally crumpled. The tears she had held back for so long came in a raw, silent, agonizing flood. She leaned against the fence post, her body shaking with silent sobs. Cole simply stood by, giving her the space and the silence she needed. After a long time, she finally spoke, and the secret, the terrible, twisted plot of her grief was finally revealed. It wasn't just sadness. It was rage. He promised me. He promised he wouldn't do it again. The horse was too young, not ready for that kind of run down the canyon ridge. But Burton and the boys, they challenged him. His pride, that damn pride. He just laughed, slapped on that saddle, and said he was the only man who could do it. The story tumbled out. The story of a reckless bet. A beloved husband who took one risk too many. She wasn't just grieving his loss. She was furious with him for causing it. And the guilt from that anger, from being furious at the man she loved, was what was truly eating her alive. I was so angry. I still am. How could he leave me? For what? For a stupid bet? And I feel so guilty for being angry. I hate myself for it. And there it was. The poison, the unspoken truth that had filled the ranch with a toxic energy. The saddle wasn't just a piece of leather. It was a monument to his final, fatal mistake. It was a symbol of her anger, her guilt, and her betrayal. As long as it sat there, a silent accusation under the sun, the past could never rest. And the horse, Inferno, in his profound animal empathy, could feel it all. He wasn't mourning his master. He was mirroring her agonizing, conflicted, and unspoken rage. Alara's confession hung in the dusty air, raw and honest. The secret that had poisoned her and her horse was finally out in the open. Cole listened, his expression unchanging, a silent testament that her anger was not a sin to be judged, but a wound to be cleansed. He let her weep until the storm of her tears began to subside into a quiet, shuddering exhaustion. He did not offer words of comfort. He offered a path forward. He looked from her tear-streaked face to the saddle, the heavy, silent monument to her pain. The horse feels what you feel, Alara. As long as that saddle sits there, his ghost is still riding this ranch. And your anger is still riding you. I can't touch it. You have to. Not for the horse. Not for me. For you, you have to be the one to put the past away. This was it, her decisive moment. It wasn't about breaking a horse or winning a prize. It was a simple, profound choice. To remain a prisoner of the past, or to take the first, terrifying step into the future. She looked at Cole, and in his eyes, she saw the quiet strength of a man who had made a similar choice long ago. She looked over at the corral, where redemption stood like a great, dark mountain of reassurance. And she looked at Inferno, who was now watching her with an unnerving, quiet intensity. Taking a deep, ragged breath that seemed to draw strength from the very earth beneath her, she pushed herself off the fence post. She began to walk toward the saddle. Every step was a battle. Every footfall was heavy with the weight of 6 months of unspoken rage and guilt. Inferno watched her, his body tense, but he did not charge. He did not snort. He stood his ground, as if he, too, understood the gravity of this pilgrimage. She reached the fence. Her hands trembled as she reached out to touch the cold, dusty leather. For a moment, she hesitated, her fingers hovering just inches away. Then, her hands closed around the heavy saddle horn. She lifted it. The moment she took its full weight into her arms, a visible shudder went through her, as if she were lifting the weight of her own grief. It was heavy, awkward, and real. She turned her back to the corral and began the long walk to the barn, carrying the symbol of her pain with her. Cole and Redemption stood by, silent witnesses to her act of courage. She disappeared into the dark doorway of the barn. A moment later, a faint thud echoed from within, the sound of a burden being set down for the last time. When Alara emerged from the barn, she was different. The heavy, unyielding mask of stoicism was gone. Her face was still etched with sadness, but it was a clean, honest grief now, no longer twisted by anger and guilt. The weight was gone from her shoulders. She walked not to the house, but directly to the gate of Inferno's corral. She didn't hesitate. She unlatched the gate and stepped inside. Cole remained where he was, knowing this was a reunion he had no part in. Inferno watched her approach. His ears pricked forward. He took one step, then another. He was not the monster from 3 days ago. He was not the anxious, pacing creature of yesterday. He was just a horse, finally seeing the woman he had always known. He met her in the center of the corral. He did not flinch as she raised a trembling hand to his face. He did not pull away as her fingers gently traced the line of his jaw. He lowered his great head and leaned into her touch. And Alara, finally, let go completely. She wrapped her arms around his strong neck and wept into his mane. Not silent, agonizing tears, but loud, cleansing sobs of release. The horse stood perfectly still, a quiet, living comfort, absorbing her sorrow. The healing was complete. A few weeks later, the Vance Ranch was a different place. The air of tension was gone, replaced by a quiet, working peace. Cole was saddling Redemption, preparing to leave. Elara approached him, a calm, sad smile on her face. Beside her, Inferno stood untethered, his coat gleaming, his eyes soft and intelligent. He's himself again. He never wasn't. He was just waiting for you. The stories they tell about you, they get it all wrong. They say you're a horse whisperer, but you don't fix horses. You reminded me how to fix myself. Thank you, Cole. Take care of yourself, Elara. Cole mounted the giant black stallion. With a final look back at the woman and the horse, now standing together in the morning sun, he turned Redemption towards the open road. His work here was done. Another soul had found its way back from the wilderness of grief. And out on the horizon, another legend was waiting to be written. If this story of healing and empathy moved you, click the video on your screen now for the next chapter in the Legends of Redemption. Don't forget to subscribe and tell us in the comments which part of Elara's journey resonated with you the most. Your story is part of our journey.